Hi, my name's Dr. Adam Booth and welcome to another locked down edition of Quantum Source. Now, I don't go to the chip shop all that often, but when our local chip shop was kind of released from lockdown and could start serving chips again, I suddenly felt this wave of elation about the matter and I had to get to the chip shop and enjoy some chips. So, I am enjoying some chips at the moment, courtesy of Croft Street Fisheries. Thanks very much to Croft Street, nice chips. And of course, Yorkshire does the best chips in the world, although I appreciate that could be a controversial claim to have made. One thing that we do, however, is that I'm able to eat my chips in relative peace and quiet because we don't have so many seagulls. I understand it that if you venture down the beach with your chips along the south coast, you'll be constantly plagued by swooping seagulls who want to steal your chips. But there's some research that's been done at the University of Exeter that suggests that you might be able to stare down seagulls and to understand a bit of their psychology about why they might be obsessed with finding and stealing your chips. And so today's speaker is the researcher who undertook that bit of science. She's Madeleine Goumas. She is a PhD researcher in the School of Biosciences at the University of Exeter. So we're going to be giving her a bell. But of course, what's the recommended sauce that goes with chips? Well, I could say chuck some vinegar on them, chuck some ketchup on them, maybe mushy peas. But I've got vinegar on these, mayo, ketchup, not on chip shop chips. My favourite sauce to enjoy with a chip is a can of Coke, actually. As rarely as I eat chips, I also drink Coke pretty rarely, but I just think there's nothing better, actually. It just really complements, like, washes it down lovely. So you get yourself wherever you want. We'll give Madeleine a call. Cheers. Hello, Madeleine. Good afternoon. How are you doing?
Hi, Adam. I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
I'm all right, thank you. Thanks for joining us, because we're going to talk gull whispering, right?
Something like that.
Something like that. All right. Before we get into the language and the psychology of gulls, then, give me a sauce. What would you recommend with a nice portion of chips?
I'm not sure about with chips, but you never know. I really like satay sauce, and I make this from soy sauce and peanut butter, and you just add a bit of water and garlic and chili and ginger, and it's really good. It's my absolute favourite.
All right, there you go, a recipe from Quantum Source. I think that's actually like the first homemade recipe we've had on, so good skill. Nice one. So let's get back to those pesky marauding gulls, yeah?
Yes.
Cool, right. We're going to get you to share your screen and we'll talk seagulls.
All right. Oh yes, I'm going to talk to you about my research that came out about this time last year on gaze aversion in herring gulls and how you might be able to deter herring gulls from stealing your chips.
It sounds like awesome tips to me.
So I thought I would give you a background about herring gulls just to start, because not everyone will be very familiar with them. They're one of 8 gull species commonly breeding in the UK, so normally called seagulls by people, but they're not the only seagull. And you can differentiate them from other gulls by their silvery grey back, pink legs and white heads in the summer. And herring gull is particularly interesting because they might well be Britain's most hated bird, I think. They're increasingly common in urban areas, and they have a bit of a reputation for liking chips, pasties and ice cream, sometimes straight out of people's hands. So some individuals actually bold enough to snatch food right from people. And we call this kleptoparasitism. So this is a term used to describe when one individual steals food from another. It's usually in other bird species. It's actually really widespread in birds, not just gulls, but gulls are actually taking food from humans. So they've sort of generalized their kleptoparasitism there, it seems. Despite being common in these urban areas, they're actually the population's actually decreased by about 60% over the last few decades. So the commonness in urban areas really masking this decline, I think. This is likely to be caused by changes in land use that affect many other species as well, but also culling. gulls are cold for a range of reasons, and people tend to understand why they're cold, I think, because, as I said, they're not the most liked birds.
Yeah.
But this, see, oh.
Yeah, maybe people don't have a lot of sympathy for them when they have this kleptoparasitic association. But I'm really surprised that they have declined like quite so much. And as you say, maybe because they're kind of like such a familiar sight, you just don't see what's going on in the background.
Exactly, yeah. So people think they're really common. They go to the seaside and they see gulls. Everyone like, oh, they're so common. Why aren't they? Why aren't people culling them more? They're just annoying. But actually, they're actually going into urban areas because it's kind of seems to be a bit of a refuge for them. They seem to be doing better there than their traditional areas. So it's something that is not a simple. There's not a simple solution, and we need to really do more research into this to see what the best solution is. So obviously, culling, if it's widespread, it's going to be a problem for a species that's already in decline. And this is a classic example of human-wildlife conflict. So human-wildlife conflict has quite a range of definitions I've seen. It's basically when human and non-human animal behaviour affect each other negatively. And it's usually referred to as conflict when losses to humans occur as a result. So in the more extreme cases, that can be predation of livestock or consumption of crops. Or in a really extreme cases when big cats, for example, actually kill humans. Humans often retaliate for these losses. So, for example, here this tiger has been killed. I don't know the actual circumstances there, but tigers are a source of human-wildlife conflict. Obviously more severe than what we experience here with gulls, but it's the same sort of thing here. And we usually think of human wildlife occurring in other countries. And we know that understanding animal behaviour helps because it's really a conflict between human and animal behaviour. So if we know something about the animals that we consider a problem, then we might be able to do something to mitigate the issues. So, for example, we know that elephants avoid bees. So in some places, bee fences have been used. So people have actually put up beehives around farming land to deter elephants from consuming crops. And this has been very successful.
Okay.
So with gulls, I just thought I'd show you this video here. So as an example of their behaviour. So we've noticed that gulls often swoop in from behind when they're taking people's food. So there's a lot of anecdotal evidence for this, and I've often seen that when I've been out, they seem to swoop in when people are unaware and take them by surprise. So really wanted to ask the question of how do they decide where to forage and on what to forage. And knowing that they do seem to swoop in from behind, it raises the question of whether they're using our behaviour. So it seems to me that they might be using gaze direction, so where a human's head and eyes are facing at the time. So this is called gaze aversion, and that's a dislike or avoidance of eye contact. And it's very common. It's actually common with animals that they don't like being watched. So I thought, maybe gulls are displaying this behaviour as well, and they're actually, if you look at them, perhaps you can actually slow down their approach to the food or deter them altogether. So I decided to do an experiment to test this. This is a very crudely drawn diagram of me and a gull that I'm testing, and I got a bag of chips because I thought all gulls in these coastal towns probably know what chips are and be quite partial to them. I tested each gull twice so I could have a comparison between when I was looking at the gull and when I was looking away. So I either looked at them with my head and eyes facing them, or I turned my head and eyes away, and I timed how long it took for a gull to approach and peck at the chips. I actually had the chips in a bag because I didn't want to actually feed the gull. I found that even though I tried to test 74 gulls, only 19 completed both trials, which I found that quite surprising because they have quite a reputation for being really bold and trying to get food whenever they can. But it seems that most of them were too nervous. And I tested this by moving away, leaving the chips in place and moving away for the gulls that didn't approach to see what they did. So most of them were motivated. Well, half of the ones at least were motivated to actually peck at the chips, and which showed that it was just my presence that stopped them in the first place. But overall, I just thought I'd show you my plot from the paper that we released about this. And we found that overall gulls took longer to approach when I was looking at them. So I'll just tell you what this graph's actually showing. So on the left, I've got the time they took when I was looking at them, and on the right, I've got the time when I was looking away. And each line connecting these two sides is an individual's time difference. So you can see that most of the lines are going down. So they took less time when I was looking away. So they seem to be a bit bolder when I was looking away, because obviously, if they're averse to gaze, then this makes sense. But then obviously there's quite a variation in times there, and some of them were quicker when I was looking away. So they don't all behave as one, but overall there was clear evidence for gaze aversion, and the median difference in time they took was 21 seconds.
Okay.
And I just thought I'd show you an example video of one of the gulls I tested. So here I have this gull, and I put the chips down, look away, and he's straight in there. Gone straight over to check at the chips, and then I stop him. So here's the next trial when I'm looking at him. And he comes over, but he just stops. And he's checking me out. And at the time, I'm looking at him in the eye, and he's looking back at me, and it's like, no. And he goes off, and he goes back and forth like that for 5 minutes. And I thought, I'm not going to show you the whole video.
But either way, he just keeps skulking off, and then he comes back again, skulks off again.
Yeah, so he didn't touch the chips the whole time. So this got me wondering when gulls' aversion to gaze develops. So we had this piece of research, and we decided to do a follow-up. So I'm just going to let you know about this next bit of research. So I wondered whether it results from interactions with humans. So you can imagine that gulls might become wary of gaze if they're often chased away from humans, for example, because humans will be looking at them when they're chasing them away. So we decided that we'd test juveniles to see, because obviously these have very limited experience with humans, being only hatched the same year. And we also decided to test urban versus rural gulls. So urban is a human settlement that's over 10,000 people in population size, and rural is the opposite. I also wanted to check whether they were responding to head or eye direction. So in my previous experiment, I just turned my head. So I had my head and eyes facing the same direction. So it didn't really tell me whether they are paying attention to eyes specifically. And also waiting for gulls to come over to us, when most of them, as I showed before, seemed to be too nervous to do that, meant that we had quite a small sample size. So we wanted to try and get a bigger sample. So instead, we approached the gulls instead of waiting for them to come to us.
Okay.
The method that this is called is flight initiation distance. So the experimenter finds a gull, starts approaching, and measures how closely he or she can approach. And this distance tells us how bold, basically, an individual animal is. So the closer you can get to them, the more they're tolerating you approaching them closely. So a long flight initiation distance is a sign of a more wary animal, and a short flight initiation distance is a sign of a less wary animal. And we found that overall there was a difference between the two conditions, looking at the gull and looking away, of 2 meters. So you can get 2 meters closer to a gull on average when you are looking away from them. So this supports our previous research that they find direct gaze aversive. And because we tested, I didn't say this before, did I? We kept a head direction constant and just had either looked at the gull or looked down at the ground. We found that this shows that they are actually paying attention to eye specifically and not just head direction. And we also found that juveniles also had this response. So this aversion to gaze is present very early on in the gull's life. So possibly present when they're very young, when they hatch. We don't know that from this experiment, but it's present early on, which is quite interesting. We also found overall that urban gulls, so gulls in areas with population of over 10,000 people, appear to be bolder than gulls in rural areas, which isn't really surprising. It might be that they're more accustomed to humans. So just to conclude all that, go back to the question of how conflict between humans and herring gulls can be reduced. So we found that herring gulls prefer to take food from people who aren't paying attention. So there's quite an obvious answer to this, is if we increase our attentiveness, then it's likely that we can reduce food theft by gulls and avoid the element of surprise. Because I don't know about you, but when I've seen gulls take food from people, it's almost always been when people aren't paying attention. So often I've seen people with an ice cream in one hand looking down at their phone like this, and it's like you can just see it happening before it actually happens. So just totally unaware, and the gull just swoops in and gets it before the person's even realizes a gull close by.
Like, you need to keep your eyes on the prize, because if you don't, the gulls will.
Basically. So yeah, just really be aware of the gulls, that they're, if there are gulls around, be aware that they might be looking to get a snack, basically. And yeah, it's pretty obvious, really. Like it sounds like I'm telling Granny to suck eggs, I think, sometimes, but sometimes people just need to have that little reminder, because on a nice day, you've got an ice cream, you just want to relax, and then just pay a bit of attention to what's around. And also another obvious thing is to decrease opportunities for gulls to actually be able to take food, because every time they're successful in taking food, that's reinforcing that behavior. So they're going to do it again if it's been successful for them before.
So you're saying that's kind of like obey the signs that say, please do not feed the gulls, and minimize your food waste or something like that.
Yeah, so all that sort of thing. So people actively feed gulls. People probably most of the time unintentionally feed gulls. They drop food either by accident, or they just can't bother to put their food in a bin, and all these things. And it's just encouraging them. So there are things we could do to reduce this and just make everything a bit better. So yeah, that's about it. I just wanted to acknowledge a few people who've contributed to all my work. So my supervisors and the undergrads who helped with this work. So thank you.
Cool. Thank you very much, Madeleine. Could I get you to unshare your screen, please? Okay, so thanks very much for the talk, Madeleine. It's really interesting, cool research. Just had a couple of questions, if I may. I get the feeling that you can understand why people get frustrated with gulls, but ultimately you actually feel quite sorry for gulls.
Yeah, I suppose so. I think the main thing is I see that a lot of this can be prevented, and I think humans do have a responsibility. I don't need to say really how much humans have affected the environment and the ecosystems for all other species, and I do think that we shouldn't just be protecting the species that we like. That's not what conservation is supposed to be about. And when it's something like this that can be prevented with quite simple measures, I think it's a no-brainer, really. There's no need to villainize an animal for just trying to get some food.
Yeah, right. I mean, the case with me was that if we were doing this talk in Australia, then Australia's most hated bird is the ibis, and I know this because Jane, my girlfriend, is Australian. And there was they call them the bin bird because they hang around sucking bin juice out of the bottom of the bin. But ultimately, that's because of their habitat destruction. They don't really have any other choice, but people just think they're dirty and annoying and whatever. So yeah, again, it's more conflict, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, people put their own sort of morals, I think, on other animals, and oh, they're going into a bin, that's disgusting, that's just disgusting animal, or oh, they stole my food, there's just they're greedy, or they're evil. It's just they're just trying to survive. That's right. All.
And I think the first video that you saw where the seagull approaches from behind, it's like you'd almost think that they know where they should be approaching from, but it's not quite as clear cut as that in that kind of backstabbing approach.
Yeah, because I think people think automatically this means that if they are avoiding human gaze, so direct gaze, that means they've got some theory of mind, which means they know exactly what they're doing and what the human's thinking. But this doesn't actually provide evidence of that at all. It's not to say they don't have this ability, but it could just simply be that they see the appearance of eyes as being something just inherently scary, and they're avoiding that, and that's all that's happening. So people shouldn't think, oh, they're deliberately trying to outfox me, because they're just, they see food, they're trying to reduce risk, that's all. Yeah,
and if you get outfoxed by a seagull, then maybe you've got to ask yourself a few questions.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you very much for those tips for the summer, Madeleine. I'm sure that everyone out there will bear it in mind, and they won't lose too many chips and ice cream to seagulls. What I would say is that on those slides a minute or so ago, you'll have seen Madeleine's Twitter account, and so if you do want to put any questions to her, I'm sure she'd be happy to take something from Twitterland out there.
Yeah, that's fine. Sure.
Cool, absolutely. Thanks very much then, Madeleine. We'll leave you to your afternoon, and we'll see you around.
Yeah, thank you.
Cool. Take it easy now. Bye-bye.
So thanks very much to Madeleine. Lots of tips for your chips to help you have a great summer. And do remember that if you do get swooped by a seagull, don't blame the bird. Now, if you enjoyed that, then you can keep your gaze directed towards the Quantum Source Twitter and Instagram feeds. We'll be posting lots more videos to keep you educated and entertained throughout this lockdown summer. It just remains for me to say that I've been Dr. Adam Booth. This has been Quantum Source. You've been great. Stay cool.